right, we've got to talk about this. 3D printer is running as we give the background into what's going on. Oh boy, Van Briggs says, I don't know love on the internet. I redeemed 2 points for things I got no love, hydrate and stretch. Shit, you're right. I do have to stretch and I do have to hydrate. Thank you, Van Briggs. Thank you, Van Briggs. All right. So, this is going to be a long video. Strap yourselves in. We got a lot to cover. We got to talk about Warhammer. Now, first, I have to go ahead and get every single person who is an asshole out of the video immediately by pointing out that I don't play Warhammer. I don't. I have a very minimal investment in the lore. I was a fan of the Emperor's Text-to-Speech device before they had to stop that show because they were worried about Games Workshop being Games Workshop, basically. Jeff Teague says, model Classic Suris. I guess I'm going to be switching to Classic Suris for this video. Perfect. We'll do Classic Suris for this particular video. It's fine.
I am a Warhammer fan and I'm laughing my ass off at these fools.
There we go. There we go. The only reason I didn't want to use this model is because the mouth is perpetually open right now. It's the reason why I moved away from the Classic model today, because the 3D printer is making the mouth perpetually open. So, there's just nothing I can do about that. We're just going to do this. Fix that right up. There we go. There we go. All right. Warhammer stuff. So what has happened here recently? Again, my bona fides are none. I'm not the biggest Warhammer fan, but I am friends with a lot of people who are fans of Warhammer, and I've heard basically nothing about this controversy from anybody who actually gives a crap about the game. But what I have heard from is idiots on the internet. I've heard a lot from idiots on the internet, so we are going to talk about the idiots on the internet real quick. That's important to me. But first of all, I need to go ahead and take the hood off. There we go. That's more comfy. That is more comfy. Now, what has happened? Well, let's get to the fan art section first, and then I'll show you what has happened here. So, from Mathematical Cabbage, said, oh no, the slime has breached containment, sound the alarms. Apparently, during the math sheet, the slime is escaping. Slime Suris is out. Everybody is going to die. There's nothing you can do about it. Thank you very much, Mathematical Cabbage. I greatly appreciate it. If you want your fan art to be shown in a future video, drop it into the fan art section of the Discord. With that said, let's go ahead and move into the tweet that has started 1,000 incels and their rage. This one right here. From Warhammer Official. This is Warhammer Official saying, since the first of the 10,000 were created, there have always been female custodians. Which, you know, we would just call them the Custodes for the most part. But yeah, there have always been female custodians in the lore of Warhammer, according to Warhammer Official. Now, what does this statement actually mean? Does this mean that these have existed in the game for thousands of years? No, the game hasn't existed for thousands of years. Please stop being media illiterate on the internet. What this actually means is there is a retcon modification or soft change to the lore to allow female custodians to be a thing within the lore. Now, we're going to get into why this isn't really much of a retcon from what I understand here in a bit, but for the time being, let's go ahead and pretend this is a retcon until we pull out more information. Does this matter? Like, if Magic the Gathering said there were only male planeswalkers 20 years ago and then suddenly there were female planeswalkers, would that matter? No, it wouldn't matter at all. It doesn't. From what I understand, within the Space Marine faction, there's really only, or with the faction of the Imperium, there's really only one group of people that can only be male, technically speaking, and it's the Space Marines. And that's because the chemicals that are pumped into the Space Marines to make them Space Marines functionally would turn even the most feminine woman into the biggest masculine, jacked, testosterone-ridden dude, because that's what they do. It's a chemical alteration of the body. So there's technically only one group in the Imperium that it seems can only have males, and that's because even the women would be forced to basically undergo HRT and become men. So that's the one. Said trans Space Marines confirmed. Basically, sounds like a good excuse for trans mass representation. And you know, that's fair. All Space Marines have Marine in their gender. Their gender is Marine. So this sparked some controversy, just a little bit, because they decided to give us a new, or I say us, again, the Warhammer players, gave them a new codex, which is a rule book that has a bunch of information about the game's lore, as well as, it's primarily for its mechanics, but the codex is also useful for revealing little bits of lore. And so female custodians were a thing that were going to be in the codex talked about, and then people just went, why did you make female custodians? Well, since the, I love how it's also from IDK 721252. Name bunch of numbers. It's always name bunch of numbers. Every single time. It is name bunch of numbers that start shit on Twitter. Just no name, no concept, barely even people, things on the internet. Now, let's preface this real quick with me taking a drink. But let's go ahead and preface this real quick with the difference between Warhammer lore and Warhammer, the game as ran by Games Workshop. The lore is what the writers want it to be, and it is that way for everything that exists ever. Every single time there is a piece of medium and a change happens in the lore, everything gets a retcon. Star Wars gets retcons. Dragon Ball got retcons. Do you remember when we found out that, turns out if mortals used the fusion earrings in Dragon Ball for more than 15 minutes, they would separate? The fusion would separate no matter what, as long as the people involved were mortals. This basically explained why Vegito separated in Majin Buu's body, and everybody said it was a retcon, but no, it was actually a piece of information that was never fully explained to begin with. They basically said, oh, it's probably the magic inside Majin Buu's body, but none of the Kais really knew, because none of the Kais had been using those earrings on mortals to begin with. And then, by the time we got to Super, and we actually had an instance against Zamasu, that the earrings needed to be used, the unfusing did happen, and we got, oh, okay, cool. So this is how they work. Is that a retcon? Kind of, but it's also filling in the blanks where information was not there. Now, as far as the Custodes were concerned, from what I understand, because I decided to do a decent bit of research on this before I started talking about this, unlike somebody we're going to cover for this video, the Custodians were all known to have been sent off-planet in Warhammer lore. The male Custodians were. All the male Custodians were sent out to go do the Emperor's bidding. That didn't leave out the possibility that the female Custodians were left home to do home shit for the Emperor. Like, that's omitted information filled in later by Games Workshop. Like with the fusion thing with Dragon Ball Super, is that a retcon? Kind of. Does it really matter? No, not really. The story is what the author creates. It is not what the fans hold on to dearly as a thing. For instance, in Sonic the Hedgehog, it has been said in previous lore that only male hedgehogs could have super forms. But previously, Tails and Knuckles, neither of which are hedgehogs, and only one of which is probably male. I'm kidding. That's an old joke about Tails. But both of them have super forms that are considered semi sort of kind of not canon in Sonic the Hedgehog 3. But they have super forms that happen, and they are not male hedgehogs. And then, in later Sonic stuff, we get a Super Amy, showing that actually female hedgehogs can have a super form, when it was already confirmed as well that you get the idea. The information on who could and couldn't have a super form changed based on the authors who were involved. And this is a very common thing that happens when you have... so doesn't Blaze have a super form? Yes, but Blaze is from another dimension, so any rules that apply to Sonic's dimension don't necessarily apply to Blaze. She's from the Soul dimension. The rules that apply to her are completely different, because her Soul Emeralds are completely different to the Chaos Emeralds. Super forms in Sonic are generally things that are achieved by using the Chaos Emeralds. Blaze uses the Soul Emeralds. It's different for writing reasons. But anyway, with Sonic, and later on with Dragon Ball, the writers changed. Akira Toriyama was the original writer of Dragon Ball, and then eventually he ended up only giving notes to Toei Animation and Toyotaro to make their properties. To expand the Dragon Ball franchise. Likewise, Sonic the Hedgehog has had multiple writers. It had the original writing staff behind the old Sega Genesis games, and eventually led into having the Archie Comics writers making their own canon, and eventually Ian Flynn was writing the comics canon, which was loosely associated with the games, and then eventually Ian Flynn started writing the canon in the video games as well, but even then, that leaves Evan Stanley writing some of the canon in the actual comics, and more and more and more. There's a lot of people involved in the creative process for these giant things. Likewise, with Warhammer, there is no one Warhammer lore master. Warhammer, World of Warcraft, Magic the Gathering, all of these properties have a lot of people who are involved in shaping the lore of those worlds. So if one writer makes one thing and then 20 years later, another writer goes, hey, let me expand on that in an interesting way. That's not sacrilege. That's the thing that normally happens in the creative process of anything that involves the hands of several people to create. Now, why do I bring all this up? Because there's a difference between Warhammer the company and Warhammer the game as you know it as a tabletop game, and even the difference between the tabletop game and Warhammer 40k and 30k, the story bits themselves. And even a difference between those and Total War. This is from Games Workshop, who is not the hero of our story. Games Workshop are flaming pieces of shit with some of the most predatory monetization practices of all time in the hobby industries. Wizards of the Coast and them should get on perfectly fine with all the ways they like screwing over their customers. However, while they are not the heroes of the story, also good night, Suzu, there is this information that came straight from the mothership themselves that we will read before we're getting into more context. This says, Warhammer is for everyone. One of the great powers of our hobby is its ability to bring people together in a common cause, to build bonds and friendships that cross divides. We believe in and support a community united by shared values of mutual kindness and respect. Our fantasy settings are grim and dark, but that is not a reflection of those who we are and of how we feel the real world should be. We will never accept nor condone any form of prejudice, hatred, or abuse in our company or in the Warhammer hobby. We will continue to diversify the cast of characters we portray through miniatures, art, and storytelling so everyone can find representation in heroes that they can relate to. Now, we're going to pause here for a second to talk about representation. Representation is an important thing in media. Reason being, generally speaking, people feel more seen, people feel more heard when somebody who looks like them, acts like them, has a similar experience to them, is in the fantasy world that they take a part in. Now, this does not need to be the case for all media, right? You don't need every single type of representation in something like, say, Sonic, where the characters are anthropomorphized animals. There's already a few degrees of separation. It's easier to put yourself in the skin of something that is so abstracted. But the characters in 40k are humans and aliens and chaos beings and whatever the fuck Shalanesh is making in the back rooms. Do you think her and Zeech get it on? Probably. Anyway, point is, the various beings in Warhammer, there's so many characters in that story that it's very easy to just put in an aside in a codex about one character who happens to be disabled or happens to be a girl or happens to be non-binary or happens to be anything. Like, not everybody has to be the biggest, bulkiest, damnedest space marine of all time. And it doesn't take away from the grim, dark setting to say, hey, a disabled person is here. Hey, there are female Custodes. Like, none of this, quote, wokeifying of Warhammer makes Warhammer more soft. Does it make a world more soft just to have women in different areas of power in it? Or is it just as fucked, but with boobies? Like, I'm sorry, but I've seen some pretty fucked media that had women as the main characters. You don't just go, I'm gonna go watch Madoka Magica with my little sister. It's gonna be fine. Nothing bad happens in episode 3. It's just a show about a bunch of magical girls crying about their mommy. And then you watch the show and realize you've traumatized a child. And then you keep watching the show, and then you realize that, you know, all the characters get naked in the last episode. And then it feels weird, and you wonder why you brought a little child to watch this show. Mommy just got a haircut, it's fine. Mommy just needed her head in the game. But point is, the existence of females in certain parts of the show does not make that show any less fucked up, grim, or dark. It never will. It never has. The only people who believe that are people who exist solely on the couch of their parents' basement. That's not even a bed. They've maybe got a futon. Those are the people who have that opinion. Because you have to be so incredibly sheltered to have that particular opinion. Now, there's more going on with this as well that we'll get into here in a bit, but I wanted to go ahead and put up that difference between the lore, how the lore is or isn't affected in any media at all by the existence of, you know, different genders, different characters, different disability representations, and how it's not really affected in any way, shape, or form. Now, we need to get into the Quarterings video. Not a lot of it, because we got so much more to cover than him, but,
Look at this. Oh, look at this. First thing I do is I say, would you look at this? You know what I mean? Just look at it. Just look at it.
So, this is part of a conspiracy that because some of the biggest shareholders in Games Workshop are BlackRock, there's a whole mini conspiracy about that being associated with Jewish money. So, you know, it's the Quartering, so take that for what you will. Just... we're going to slide by that one, because we don't need to expound on that too much further. We already know that Jeremy is a Nazi. We already know that he's been supported by Antelope Hill, which is literally a Nazi organization whose entire purpose it is to reprint Nazi memorabilia and books and get those out to the masses so that the ideology of the Nazis, the original Nazis, can be preserved. So... we already know the angle that he's shooting for here. So let's continue.
Yeah, well...
what the heck is that?
What's wrong, everyone? Jeremy here from the Quartering. Well, we all saw it coming. Warhammer, of course, getting woke, just like all the great video games and board games of our time. I also...
all the great games of our time, all going woke. Could it be that as... advertising strategies change, as games appeal to wider audiences, that appeal for wider audiences will be baked into those games as part of a marketing strategy? Wouldn't that make sense? Wouldn't that make sense? So I remember during the earliest ages of video game history, because I say this because this is what I did my report on in high school, was the history of video games. Video games were marketed in the 80s and 90s to boys. This was a thing that was marketed to young boys. If you wanted something that was marketed to women, you specifically had to have something that was coded for them. So, like, Pac-Man was marketed to everyone, and then Miss Pac-Man would be marketed to women. But Pac-Man being marketed to everyone only really works in the world where we aren't selling it on Ataris to young boys specifically as a marketing tool. So over time, we've started to diversify, in a good way, the ways in which we market video games to greater audiences. Now, instead of having games for men, games for women, like you did Barbie Horse Adventures 5697, where only 2 people on the internet like it, we actually just have more games that are just marketed to general audiences now. And this is a good thing, because it's, I'm not gonna lie, let's say you're a lonely gamer, right? You're a lonely gamer, and you meet this gamer girl, right? And when you meet this gamer girl, you decide that you want to strike up a conversation with her. Isn't it way easier to strike up a conversation with her and, I don't know, maybe find a way to get a loving relationship if y'all share similar interests? If y'all like the same games? Wouldn't it be so much easier if you did? I don't know, segregation of the hobby shit is stupid. It makes me think of when I was a child and I stopped taking singing lessons because I was in Pensacola Christian Academy and we had a singing group, and that group was a mixed singing group, and then you were supposed to be able to go on to be the Cavaliers and the Clarinets, I think it was. I can't remember the exact names that were used. Other PCA kids, you probably know what these names were for the choirs, basically. But I opted not to continue my singing lessons because I wanted to go into the all-boys choir, and the all-boys choir got dissolved and combined with the all-girls choir. And me, as a fucking first grader, was like, no, I want my boys club where I can sing high-pitched. And I was like, that's been taken away from me. I'm leaving. But that was stupid, because as an adult, I ended up having to pay for singing lessons because I wanted to still learn how to sing, and it was a part that like could have just been part of my education that I kept going forward, and I didn't get to do that because I was a stupid kid, and I was like, gender segregation, yeah! So it would have been easier for me just now being able to sing better if I had not had that childish approach back then. That's what I see when I see people bitching about this, but let's continue.
Often lament how lame games like Magic the Gathering have gotten since they decided to embrace political ideologies and care more about.
So Magic the Gathering hasn't started embracing political ideologies. It has a higher representation of characters of color and characters who are, you know, trans and stuff in its lore to a like very small degree. That's not embracing a political ideology. That's recognizing that other people besides white male Americans exist. That's all that is. Also, Jeremy, noted, the only reason Jeremy doesn't like Magic the Gathering is because he got kicked out of every professional Magic event of all time forever for sexually harassing a cosplayer who worked for Wizards of the Coast. The reason Jeremy doesn't like Magic the Gathering is because he couldn't stop harassing someone. And then he got kicked out of the hobby forcibly by Wizards of the Coast. Ah, but definitely, it's definitely the woke. It's the woke that's the problem. Not you sexually harassing somebody to the point where they wanted to quit their job. No. That's not what it was, Jeremy. You and I both know that. But let's continue.
Having enough trans representation in their fictional video game or fictional card game, as opposed to worrying about destroying the secondary market with ridiculous reprints and crappy card stock quality. But anyway.
All right, so instead, let's go ahead and address this one. Jeremy, ridiculous reprints? I'm sorry, but no. Accessibility to cards is a good thing. People having more access to cards they can play is a good thing. This is the reason why I'm at my Magic the Gathering channel. I do $15 decks, because I want people playing my fucking game, Jeremy. I want people to enjoy the gathering part of Magic the Gathering. And the way to have people enjoy that is by making sure that those people can actually play with the fucking cardboard. Do you know one of the biggest problems Magic has in terms of accessibility? It's that every format that's not Commander costs a car or house payment to get into. Every single one. You want to talk about ridiculous reprints? No, Jeremy. I'm not a Warhammer fan, but I am a fan of Magic the Gathering, and I can tell you one of the biggest problems in Magic is not ridiculous reprints, it's the price of entry. How do you get somebody to play Modern when it takes them $1,200 to play one of the top decks? And Modern is not a format where you can just play a tier 4 deck and be happy and fine. No, you have to play the strongest things available, because in Modern, if you are not playing what is the best available possible, you die. Modern is an eternal format. We have a billion options, and the best options are already at the top. Sibi Soto says it's technically pay to win. It's not pay to win, it's pay to play. It's pay for entry. Pay to win is something that can infinitely scale up, and you just need better numbers than the other person to win. Pay to play is there is an entry fee associated with getting into the game that you must pay in order to play. Magic the Gathering, you can have one of these decks, but if I hand somebody my deck, right? Hardened Scales. If I were to give you a Hardened Scales deck, and you didn't know how to play Hardened Scales, you would lose 100% of the games you played. Not just you, but anybody. Because that is a deck that requires you to sit there and know a billion different ways to get to 20 damage from 3 cards. And it's none of it's automatic infinite combos. It's all very, very awkward ways to stagger your pieces to make it so that a character, like, loses. It's a very, very difficult thing to do if you don't know what you're doing. So I won't say pay to win. I will say pay to access. That's the problem, Jeremy. Not a bunch of reprints. Now, the cardstock quality is bad. I will 100% agree with that. But the issue is not, reprints. Reprints are fine. Reprints are good. Reprints are a thing you want in your game. Stop looking at Magic the Gathering as your investment portfolio. Claire.
Warhammer is probably on a completely different level in terms of lore, in terms of cost to enjoy the game, and the monopoly that the company that runs it actually has over the game. Games Workshop is probably one of the most hated companies by the fans in the game of any company. Like, is it? I can't think of another.
Man, Games Workshop has such a monopoly. They have such a monopoly over their game. I can't possibly think of any way that somebody might find a way to construct a large enough army on a budget in the game of Warhammer 40k. I have no idea what methods one might use to create an army of a adequate size so that they have the correct point allocation for various tournaments. I have no idea how one would do that. I have no idea. How would you even manage that? How would you even, for an affordable price? How would you do that? God, it's so alien to me. I have no idea how you would do it. Anyway, that's a really cool printer in the background. Wonder what I'm making. Back to Jeremy.
Company that is more hated by its fans. Maybe Activision, Call of Duty, you could maybe say that. Well, coincidentally, 3 of the top 4 stockholders in Game Workshop are BlackRock and Vanguard Group, I believe. We're going to take a look at that. So you knew it was coming. These woke ESG companies invest, and of course, now we get it. Games Workshop makes insulting retcon to Warhammer 40k lore, claims all male Adaptus cadre faction had always
I just want to remind everyone that, like me, the Quartering doesn't play Warhammer. But unlike me, he decided not to actually use any amount of brain power to research the topic beforehand. And so now we have Adaptus cadres. Adaptus. Axo? This is why you should be better at phonetically managing words. This is the end result. You get to the all-male Adaptus if you don't. Anyway, Adeptus cadre
featured female members. Now, I am not a deep lore Warhammer person, although I did do a really fun, I had fun playing Warhammer RP with Arch Warhammer and V. I think Sargon too for a little while. I had a lot of fun with that. Skaven for the win. But anyway, in a development that can only be described as massively insulting to the intelligence of their player base, Warhammer 40k developer Games Workshop has taken to claiming that despite years of official canonical...
You know what's great? He's not actually providing anything. He's just reading off the article itself. He hasn't said anything original yet.
Evidence to the contrary, the game's all-male Adaptus Custodes faction...
Custodes? Custodes. Adaptus Custodes. Fritz, I'm gonna go to Gigabytes and I'm just gonna start calling them Adaptus Custodes. And I'm gonna see how long it takes for every single fucking Warhammer player there to kick my teeth in.
Custodes or Custodes? I'm not sure how to pronounce that.
Custodes? Custodes? Custodes! 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 We're done. We're done with his video. We don't have to go any further in his video. Custodes! Custodes tacos! Cadre Custodes tacos! Alright, so I bring that up. I bring his video up to show that, again, like me, people talking about this don't seem to actually be people who give a shit about Warhammer. I only give a shit about it insofar as a couple things. I give a shit about it because I have friends who give a shit about it. I have friends who care about it, and so by proxy, I care about it. The other reason that I care about it is that there was a collaboration done with Warhammer. This is one of the Necrons that was done in Magic the Gathering. There was a Magic the Gathering Warhammer collaboration, and so there's certain characters that I actually care about more. Certain characters like Magnus that I already had a fondness for because of the text-to-speech device series got Magic the Gathering cards. We didn't really get the Custodes, unfortunately, even though we got our Imperium set. But we did get Necrons. I'm hoping that they do another Warhammer 40k collaboration so we can get orcs finally, like actual orcs in Magic would be cool. But point is, the people who are talking about this the most are not the people who are actually playing the game. They're not the people who actually enjoy the game. They're not the people who actually are part of the community. I'm not part of the community, and I'm talking about it because of the people who aren't part of the community who can't stop talking about it, like fuckface here. This is Grums, also known as Mark Kern, who we've covered before. This is a person who says that he worked on stuff from my childhood, worked on Diablo, worked on StarCraft, worked on World of Warcraft. Now, granted, only one of those was my childhood. I didn't play StarCraft or Diablo growing up, but I did play a lot of World of Warcraft, and I've played a lot of that on stream, too. Now, Grums says here, meet the trans space marine in White Dwarf magazine. Warhammer 40k hasn't gone woke. Warhammer is fine. Meanwhile, in the Imperium, the Emperor's Marines virtue signal for chaos brownie points. Keep politics out of Warhammer. So, what is being shown here? This is a variety of space marines who are all painted. They're painted colors. They're just painted colors. So, if you've actually met people who actually buy Warhammer product and actually paint their figurines, you'll see shit like this all the time. Not everybody sits there and goes, I'm gonna print this and I'm gonna make it. I'm not printing that. You wouldn't download a Space Marine, but I'm gonna paint it. This is Muscle Bear McGruff, and he's the gruffest Space Marine. He's so strong, he chews on cigarettes. Like, not every person who's building their armies is painting them in this super serious manner. A lot of them are just like, here's my Space Marine. His name is Sparkle Fucker McGee, and he's got a giant ass blaster, and they're gonna kit bash their shit together to put a fucking Lego ass on the end of a chain gun. That's what actual fucking Warhammer people do. They kit bash and make random fucking shit all the time. So, but if you don't actually know that, if you don't interact with the community, sure, this may look a little weird, but you know what this looks like to me? Fritz says we literally painted a Space Marine with a shotgun. Yes, we did. We got a Space Marine, we put a can of spray paint next to it, we gave Saki a shotgun, and she fired at the can of spray paint. And so we got a literal Space Marine. Again, I am not a huge Warhammer fan, but I know enough Warhammer fans to know that this shit right here is completely normal and has been part of the hobby for like 15 fucking years. None of this here is new. None of this here is new. This is how the Warhammer community is. They're a very creative community because you hand people a bunch of tools so that they can create whatever the hell they want within a grimdark universe. So a lot of people take that and run full-on parody with it. as a result. Here's another bit of just sad cope from Grums.
If you enjoy me proving that Custodes that Custodes in Warhammer 40k were always men and joining the fight against wokeness in tabletop as well as video games, please subscribe.
Now, note, he said subscribe, not follow, on Twitter. This is a man going, give me your fucking money so I can bitch about people who have Space Marines they painted in trans colors. Fucking hell. So, it's funny to me when one of the people who actually worked on Warhammer decided to pipe up about this, because it's really funny to me how little actual research people like Jeremy do on this, and how little people like Grums actually care about this. I don't care about any of this, but I'm willing to do my fucking due diligence. So, here we go. This is Nick Davis, who used to work for Games Workshop, providing his own statement on the culture of the company and everything else. Let's begin. I worked for Games Workshop for a very specific part of its history. I started in the mail order trolls and worked my way into the studio, finishing out my career with Games Workshop on White Dwarf Magazine UK and then United States Edition. During my time at the company, especially during my White Dwarf years, I had one mission. I wanted to share the joy of the Warhammer hobby to me. The Warhammer hobby gave me. To lift up that mystic veil and show who you, the average gamer, like me, could participate no matter what your skill level. In short, take some of the mystery out of what is dry brushing. I'd like to think I mostly succeeded in this mission, and I'm heartened when I hear from new vets in the hobby who cite me as a positive influence. The hobby, as I like to call it, is supposed to be a fun, uniting force between gamers, to create friendships, a social function, something to be enjoyed and shared. You never were supposed to build silos of lore, because the very idea that Warhammer and 40k universes was that the history was so convoluted and fragmented that there was no such thing as a fact. It's a parody series, of course that's the case, but apparently people like Grumps don't understand that because they're fucking stupid. Everything was supposed to contradict. That was the purpose. That being said, I'm overjoyed at seeing the hobby that once gave me a means to live being so inclusive. Seeing female or LGBTQ characters, seeing them represented at the highest level of Games Workshop toy soldiers is pure joy. I love it. I wish I had seen more of it during my time at Games Workshop, but we are here now, and you've made this old white dwarfer very proud. Play well. So, that's from somebody who actually worked at the company, giving their perspective on that. And then his post blew up, prompting him to make this response. He's had to make a few responses. We'll go over a couple of them today. But if we look at some of the responses to his stuff, certain people have been very stupid about this. Look at this response from a Captain Latham. And I don't censor people on Twitter, because if you're willing to post publicly on the internet, you're willing to get burned publicly on the internet. Fuck off, ya pansies. Saying,
This won't end well, Nick. You can rationalize it if you want, but this was not an act of kindness. It was an act of betrayal, driven by the paternalistic arrogance of a novel, twisted moral system that is disconnected from truth, honor, quality, and fun.
Boy howdy, that's a lot of words for what is effectively painting toy soldiers. That's a lot of stupid words for a bunch of just... It's just toy soldiers. I love Magic the Gathering. I will never take it this fucking seriously. Never, not in a million fucking years. Or this one from Arctis. What are the armies that we placed upon the board that we've pent days painting? If there is no coherent lore, we might as well ditch the minis and use pine cones. If the game is the point, without the lore, there are no armies of the Imperium and their regalia. Only cones. Yes, you're understanding the point a little bit, actually. The point is, the game is quite literally the friends you make along the way. Without somebody else on the table ahead of you, you don't have a game. The point is to enjoy the game. The point is that the lore only matters insofar as you allow it to matter. And you, my friend, are allowing it to matter a little too much. Just a little too much. Anyway, this is a follow-up Nick had to make as a result of this. Wow, I did expect my last post expressing my support for inclusion in the hobby to blow up so much. To me, gaming, this hobby, has always been about fun, inclusion, community, sharing, and fragging your mates with as many dice as you can muster from an Imperial Guard firing line. Share the joy, my friends. I have been posting White Dwarf retrospective over the last couple months, ever since being interviewed by Ben of 90% Geek. You can check out today's drop featuring Codex Eldar and a battle report I don't remember taking part in. And then there's actually a little bit more people who are, like, actually supportive. Orc players be like, this is the first folly. I saw a guy who was trying to do an infinite point army of orcs, and the jokes were like, it took 5 months to get through the first turn rolls. But anyway, again, I don't play, but I do find Warhammer fascinating, so. And then, of course, Grums has words to say about this.
The issue with Warhammer and Custodes is the lie. They could have changed it all they wanted, but they wanted to lie and pretend it was that way all along. All right, Grums. So I want you to understand the difference between a retcon and the lore, because human beings haven't been making Warhammer for 10,000 years. So since the first of the 10,000 were created, there have always been female custodians. This is, again, I went over in the beginning of the video, probably a soft retcon, more than anything. 36 white male protagonists, but last year I had 37! Based Takahata. This is not lying. This is the people who are in charge of the lore adding to the lore, because that's what they're allowed to do. Warhammer the game is yours, the players, but Warhammer the story is theirs to shape. It's their world, and you live in it. If they change something about the world, it's not the worst thing in the world at all. But here's one of the designers, Andy Hoare. Hoare? I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that name. Hoare? I'm hoping it's Hoare. Had a comment about this, saying, this all stems from the assumption that there's a binding contract between author and reader to adhere to some non-existent subjective construct of true representation of the setting. There is no such contract. There is no such objective truth. Again, the world is not yours. The world is theirs. You get to play in it. You can be upset with the things that they do with the lore. Like, I can be upset that Outlaws of Thunder Junction is basically just, what if we put more silly hats on wannabe planeswalkers? And we forgot that Rakdos was as big as a city. What if we forgot all of that? Like, I could be upset about that, but it's not going to make me do a giant post about it. And then there's going to be that one guy that says you don't care about magic lore, you only read the wiki, and then I get to show him my collection of Ravnica novels and my Time Spiral novels, which I don't have all of them anymore because they all got fucked during moving. But I can show what I still have of that and show that I actually have read this lore. But it's not going to matter, because if somebody's going to call you a tourist, they're going to call you a tourist. It doesn't matter. Which brings me to my next point. If I have it here. Here is one of them. Let's see here. So, here is a post I found on this, where people were basically calling people who were the developers of Warhammer that they were tourists and not actually part of the hobby. The hobby they created, mind you. The hobby they built. The hobby they managed. The hobby that they created for you to play. They're the tourists. But the post goes, I can't fathom the mental gymnastics of these naysayers have gone through. They've attacked ADP, Gary Chalkins, Altworld, Sugahammer, and Realm of Plastic, and others. All above mentioned either currently work for or work with Warhammer, or who are large, prominent lore voices. So here's one.
that I found during this. Gary Chalk says, it's not about me. I don't particularly want any Marines. Lots of women players and painters want Space Marines that look like them. If the only thing that prevents this is a bit of, and I don't have the rest of the tweet there, but this one doofus, who again, I'm imagining doesn't actually play the game, because if these people played the game, then maybe they would actually care. This is from when the first rumblings of female Space Marines were going out. Genghis Crane here says, bro, you're a tourist to the Warhammer 40k series. Please, there is Sisters of Battle, and they fight with Space Marines. They are an almost equivalent to Space Marines. Shut the fuck up. Yeah, the Sisters factions, like Sisters of Silence and shit. I guess you could make that point, but how is Gary Chalk a tourist? He literally points out he's one of the original playtesters for 40k, worked for Games Workshop twice, did all the artwork for the first edition of Space Hulk, and then says he doesn't know shit from Putty. Damn! Can you imagine that? Or Igthorn here going, you're not a fan. You're not a consumer of 40k. You don't care about the lore. You're an activist, and you want to make a hobby yours to spite those you perceive as bigots. You are a bully. And then Jamie here, Realm of Plastic, goes, hey, I've been painting Warhammer for 30 years. Created and ran the internet's biggest and most popular 40k character name generator website. But try again. You see, these people desperately need Gamergate 2 to happen. They want Gamergate 2 to be a thing so bad. They need every single person that is actively involved in making their hobby better and more inclusive. They need all of those people to be evil outside influencers and not actually people who care about the army. Of course, Grums here commented on the Nick Davis thing, going, Nick Davis, former Games Workshop writer for White Dwarf, says 40k lore is meant to be full of contradictions and devoid of fact on purpose. Of course it is! It's a parody series! The point of Warhammer is it's parody. It's a satire. The Imperium is just the British Empire, but in space, with a fucking dude on a chair who farts out galaxies on a whim. And if he ever croaks, the entire race of humanity is probably toast. Right? The Tyranids are just space bug communists. But okay. Also, speaking of Space Marines, meet Slime Suris the Space Marine. Just... these are things Fritz is sending me. Meet Furry Luna. Just Blood Ravens. Let's go. Dabbing Space Marines. Those are canon. This shit might actually make me play Warhammer. This shit might actually make me start playing Warhammer. I don't have Warhammer money. But this shit makes me want to actually start. Fucking hell. And then, of course, we get comments like this one. Oh, look, another female pretending to enjoy the historically fucking historically 100% male hobby. Go get yourself the attention you desire on OnlyFans. And then Lewis Sugden, I've spent over a decade pretending to be into Warhammer, failing to respect that it's historically a 100% male hobby, apparently. It's just so many of these people who are actually part of the fucking fandom, or are part of the online fandom, where all they do is post memes on 4chan, are freaking out about this as if it matters. It doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. You don't need Warhammer money, you just need some pine cones. Hey! Or, alternatively, we can build it. We can make it strong. We can't do that! That's illegal! Sorry, you wouldn't download a Tyranid! Oh, by the way, so, on the female Space Marine thing, turns out that, even in the Warhammer roleplay rulebook, under gendered archetypes, It says that thus far, the gene seeds necessary to transform a mortal into a space marine have only proven effective on specific male biologies. But boy howdy, doesn't the actual sentence beginning with thus far show that there's room for changes? Isn't that what happens? If something says thus far, can't that actually mean that there is room for improvement, room for changes? That feels like what that sentence is actually meant to be. Ignoring the fact that, again, the people who own the lore are able to retcon the lore as they want. But that's a thing that just is standard for these kinds of stories. They're made by multiple creators, so they leave room for improvement when they can. But of course, it all has to culminate in two things. One last thing from Grums and one last thing from Nick Davis. Let's start with the bad one, and then we'll move on to the good one. So we can tell that Grums has done some sus shit on the internet, because if you post something like this, I'm sorry, but you've probably got a couple skeletons in your closet. Grums goes, "You're going to see just how far they will go to cancel me next week. There is going to be an all-out attack, not based on fairness and whose timing is obvious. They want to use me as an example to strike fear in anyone else in gaming who tries to speak out, and they will fail because I'm in it to win it. We will win it. They aren't trying to present any fairness or truth. They're trying to destroy a human being as much as they can. This is what we are dealing with." Boy, howdy, my guy. Don't tell the entire class you might have some skeletons in your closet that you don't want addressed, because people on the internet might actually start digging for those skeletons in your closet. Everybody's got some. Everybody's got some shit that they regret, that they'd rather the entirety of the internet not know. But this is probably not the best way to go about that. This is probably not the best way to try to head that off at the pass. All this does is tell a whole bunch of people who are willing to go in and find all your shit that there's probably something to find there. Anyway, that was 5 days ago. I guess we'll see what comes up from that. But we'll end on this update from Nick that happened as well. Saying, okay, let's try this one more time. I'm not devaluing anyone's experience of the gaming hobby, and I cannot talk to whatever Games Workshop does with their social media or any other decision. Even when I worked for them on White Dwarf, I was never in a position of any influence. Beyond any good I will or may have garnered with my work and sharing my joy of the hobby over the years, I was there. The primary point of my post on Tuesday is don't let the lore get in the way of having fun with your friends. I've been around Games Workshop games since Warhammer 1st Edition, and I have seen the games and universes around them change many, many times. Two examples. When the Custodes were introduced in Rogue Trader, they were just skinny guys in cloaks and masked, armed with laser rifles in the shape of a lance. And they never ever left the Imperial Palace. In many ways, they were never meant to be a playable army, and Rogue Trader was more about skirmish action than any full-blown army action. So it's actually true. So the original Custodes, like I said, they're servants of the Imperium. Oftentimes just in service of the Emperor, is what they were. Another example was that in Warhammer 2nd Edition, you could take a day trip to Lusteria and pick up bolt guns that were just laying around on that continent. And then the Amazons, who also inhabited Lusteria, had access to a lot of suspicious-looking 40k tech. I wonder what happened to those Amazons and bolt guns appearing in the Warhammer world. The concept of the gaming lore, which I may have explained poorly, but I never noticed my defense of inclusion and just have fun with your games to blow up like it did. Is the lore. Sorry. The concept of the gaming lore, which I may have explained poorly, but I never expected my defense of inclusion, and I just have fun with your games to blow up like it did. Is the lore should be considered a mythology and never absolute. We only have to look at our own history for precedent, and that has changed in its definition and discovery all the time. And the worlds Game Workshop created are treated in the same way. Unreliable narration is baked in, as it should be, because the history of the universe is so vast that something always will be forgotten. This was deliberate to give you, as a gamer, a sandbox to shape as you will. This also gave Games Workshop leeway to introduce cool new things. Remember, the DAO did not exist in the 2000s, and the Necrons were only given form back in the mid-90s, and they started as Eldritch Horrors to throw as a surprise third force in your games. And let's not talk about the squats. I mean, the Votons. All I wanted to do is express the core of what I feel is important about the hobby. Inclusion is a good thing, and the game is about community. Joy, sharing, being social, and throwing buckets of dice at your mates as you frag them with an Imperial Guard, sorry, Astra Militarum firing line. I hope this explains a little more of my thoughts. Now go play some games with your mates, paint some toy soldiers, build some terrain, form what you find in the from what you find in the dumpster, and have fun. Play well, friends. So, the point, always, is that the game is a medium. It is a mode you use to enjoy time with your friends. And people who operate with it as such will have more fun. People who operate with it as if it is some kind of Bible that they need to live by in any way, shape, or form are not going to have that same amount of fun. Is there anything particularly woke said in that post? No, not really. Depending on what the fuck your definition of woke is. There's nothing said in that post that is even that problematic. And that's a post that is given solely because there are people who won't stop shutting up about this. Grum's responding going, "You're a hypocrite. You came at me and insulted me right off the bat for reporting the facts of the lore as it was published. You're not spreading joy, you're spreading hate." It's not spreading hate to point out that somebody else spreading hate is doing so. Nick Davis responds going, "Has no one been speaking about you for the last 24 hours? If you're lucky, there will be another culture war for you to try to ignite next Monday. I dearly hope. How are you online? Isn't this how you in real life?" But sadly, from what I heard, this isn't the case. Bye-bye. Okay, so very, very malformed sentence. It's very hard for me to tell, like, what's actually being said there. But basically, it seems to be that what he's trying to say is, I sincerely hope this isn't how you are in real life. I hope this is just a persona you have online. But from what I've heard, you are the same way in private as you are here. And then, of course, people going, "You immediately go on to prove his exact point." Anything he says, people are going to say, like, people who are in Grum's side of things are going to end up having that same response. They're going to have that same, "Oh my god, you're proving his point by talking about him. You're such a bully." No, the real bullies are the people who engage in peddling hatred on the internet. Those are the real bullies. Calling that out is not bullying. Pointing out something like that isn't drama. It's not bullying. It's pointing out a danger and finding out a way to adapt to it, to keep people from it, to stop people from engaging in senseless hatred for no good reason. Does it fucking matter that female Custodes have been added into a game? Ask yourself this. Does this game actually matter so much in whatever the fuck the grand culture war means? Or are you being used by a bunch of people whose only skill is making you angry and getting money from you because they are making you angry? And they've convinced you that the only thing between yourself and chaos is their voice of reason. All you have to do is subscribe to their Twitter, where they will make more posts that will make you angry. And you will pay them for it. Just take a step back and ask yourself if any of this actually matters, or if some doofus on the internet has convinced you that it matters. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. As always, thank you for watching this very long episode, and insert end of video tagline here. Hey, I just quickly want to give a thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who keep this show running. YouTube and Twitch are a pretty bumpy ride at the best of times, and the stability a Patreon provides me is worth more than I can say here. I'd also like to thank each and every one of my $20 and up patrons here, and they would be Red Joker, Britzkrieg, Cameron, Dren, Jemshin, Smiling DM, Poundini, Mabbity Babbity, Naomi, Isaac, Nixie-chan, the Oberon team, Agamotto, Jordan, Ravi, Giuni, Kiratorian, Prisma, all of you, I'm not saying that part, and Starlight. And finally, thank you to everyone else that helps keep this channel alive. While you're here, why not check out another video? And thank you for watching.